or really I would say not an idea, maybe a mode of instruction that we find in the most remarkable book ever written by man. I'm saying this, it's a pretty bold statement. But I think that that's a fair argument. When you talk about the Talmud, it's probably the most remarkable set of books written by man. When I say written by man, this including the Torah, because we believe the Torah is written by God, even though Moshe is the one who wrote it. He's the scribe, he's the typist, he is the stenographer, and he's the one who delivers it to us, but it's not his ideas. And in fact, we're told that if someone, our belief system at Maimonides writes is that we cannot believe that Moses invented anything on his own. And we have lots of evidence for that. I gave an entire 5-part series. I have 5.5 hours of content proving this point. So we could talk about maybe some other time.
I don't... So the Talmud, the oral Torah, that's the Talmud, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
You're saying is... I don't understand your statement.
I'm saying it's a remarkable set of books. That's it. That's what I'm saying. And I made the proclamation... I made the argument. I'm going to make the argument. I made the statement that it's the most remarkable set of books ever written by man.
Why do you say it's written by?
It's authored by human authors. Human authorship, no prophecy involved.
Are people still add to it?
Huh?
Are people still adding?
No, Talmud's a sealed book. Sealed book. It was canonized in the 6th century, early 6th century, in the Common Era.
Are there existing volumes or something that are ongoing?
No. Well, yes, but not of the Talmudic era or realm. Talmud's done, yeah. So essentially, the Talmud is a collection of 63 books, wherein we find everything that we need to know as Jews. Everything. All the details. And not only that, we find how to live as a Jew. So you want to have a sukkah, right? You have a holiday of Sukkot coming up. So what does sukkah look like? What's it made of? What are the walls made out of? And what's the schach made out of? And, what if it's really high or really short? All the details of law. We have the holiday of Rosh Hashanah coming up. There's a book of the Talmud called the Book of Rosh Hashanah. And as you may guess, what does the Book of Rosh Hashanah talk about? It talks about Rosh Hashanah. And, there's an entire chapter talking about what renders a shofar a kosher shofar or not. Which animals can you use and take their horns out off to use and make a shofar for.
Yeah.
And what makes a shofar kosher?
Well, it has to be certain kind of animal. It has to be a shofar, and how it's made and how it's blown and how what intentions you have to have when you blow it. And can I... if I'm passing by a synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and I happen to hear the shofar, but I'm not thinking at all about fulfilling the mitzvah of shofar, do I still need a shofar again or not? If someone blows a shofar but he's subterranean and people only hear the echo of the shofar, like that's a question that you don't typically encounter that on typical Rosh Hashanah.
So when people are standing on mountaintops, blowing the shofar to signal to each other to pass a message along,
why would they do that? We're talking about on Rosh Hashanah. There's a mitzvah to hear the shofar.
Right, but what I'm hearing you say is that a shofar is not a kosher shofar unless you have certain intentions.
True. So you have to have the intention of fulfilling the mitzvah of shofar, or else you don't fulfill it. So, for example, you just happen to walk by and you hear the distance someone blowing shofar, but you're not thinking at all about fulfilling the mitzvah. You don't fulfill the mitzvah. It's just an example. I'm just giving an example of what the Talmud would go through, like all the different kinds of laws.
Can you go back a tiny
Go ahead.
bit? I'm still stuck
Sure.
on the idea. I thought the oral Torah was given to Moses at
True.
Sinai. So I don't know. Wait, I don't understand your first statement.
Yeah. So the content is from Moses, it's tradition from Moses, but it wasn't written down. So it wasn't finalized in the book. It wasn't canonized. It wasn't finished in a book.
But it's still the word of God.
Oh yeah, that's why it's remarkable.
But it's not made by man.
I didn't say that. It's written by man.
Authored as comparison to the written Torah that's authored by Moses. But
no, it's not authored by Moses. It's authored by God. Moses is the one who writes it down.
It's just transcribing it.
Just like if you write a book and you don't know how to type, you have
I'm not
someone
too sure
type
I
it for you.
understand it. I guess I'm splitting hairs, but I guess I don't understand the difference.
One's
I
from
think-
God and one's a human interpretation.
Well, no,
No.
that's a mistake to say. That's because Ben's pointing out that.
I thought that's what the Talmud.
No. The Talmud is just writing down that's the companion of the written Torah. We have a written Torah. The written Torah doesn't tell us how to live as Jews. Did you know that? The written Torah does not tell us how to live as Jews. You know what I'm saying, Brad? Your written Torah does not tell us how to live as Jews. You know why? Because if I gave you the written Torah and I say live as a Jew, you would come to me and say, "Hey, I can't do it because you don't give me any instructions how to do it." You say wear totafot between your eyes. What is that? What is totafot? You have an idea what the word totafot means?
It's not a Hebrew word, is it?
It's not a Hebrew word. It's one example. It's not a Hebrew word. Very
Yeah.
good. What does totafot mean, Brad?
I don't know, it's not
Well, this is the book
contagious.
that's.
Makes me want to itch. Enlighten us.
And totafot is the word the Torah uses for tefillin.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what does tefillin mean?
Box.
What is a box? How do you know it's a box? Who told you it's a box?
It's in the Talmud.
No, it's not in the Talmud. It's not only that. It's a companion work with the written Torah. Is the decryption of the written Torah. It's a good word.
Like
The-
instructions kind
But
of.
isn't-
Yeah, like how to understand the written Torah. Imagine God wrote a book. Think about this for a second. God wrote a book. Right? God made our bodies very complex. Right? You know that?
Yeah.
You have billions and trillions of cells within you and pipes that could surround the world multiple times. You're a very complex organism, Brad.
Thank you. That's it.
So, the written Torah is a very complex document. And if you just read it at face value, you would have no applicable, practical use for it. It wouldn't tell you what to do. You wouldn't know how to utilize it.
That's why God gave us the oral Torah.
That's
which we-
why it's as if it's encrypted and there's a decryption key. The decryption key is the traditions of how to understand every word of the Torah.
I always thought the Talmud was the human or the rabbinical interpretation.
So that's a major mistake, and it's a common mistake. And I don't know when this myth was perpetrated. Even though I will argue that there are some things in the Talmud, we know, Maimonides writes, there are some things in the Talmud that were developed later, like rabbinic law. And that is something which is a little bit different than quote-unquote oral Torah, because oral Torah means the companion set of instructions that went with the written Torah to understand it.
And where did it come from?
It came from Moses, same place the written Torah came from. Moses got it from God, gave it to the Jewish people.
It's talked about in the Talmud and used.
I'm sorry?
It's talked
Yes, so the
about in
Talmud primarily, I would say, is a book that's actually writing down the oral Torah. It writes down other things as well that became part of the big, greater corpus, what is now the Torah of the Jewish people. So, like rabbinic law wasn't necessarily given to Moses at Sinai, right? It was developed later, right? For whatever reason, either because they wanted to add fences around the Torah. You ever heard of that term, that idea? So the Torah itself says that it instructs leaders of the Jewish people to take preventative measures to ensure that the Torah doesn't get encroached upon. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that if there's a Torah prohibition, like not to pull a branch off a tree on Shabbat, the rabbi's responsibility is to make sure that actually gets fulfilled. So what they would do is they would stop you.
Why do you use it simpler? Like the pen.
Pen's a good example
Yeah,
as well.
that's the-
They would stop you
More down
one
to
step
earth.
before that. So the rabbi said, you're not allowed to ride a horse on Shabbat because people who ride horses frequently grab onto trees and they can pull off a branch from the tree. That's an example of rabbinic law. Or, for example, the one that Ben brought up, the Torah says you cannot write on Shabbat. Can't write on Shabbat? Well, what if you just handle a pen and you just hold it all the time and you put it over the air, right? Will you have a greater likelihood of writing if you're handling the pen the whole Shabbat? Well, of course. So the rabbi said, this is rabbinic law, a rabbinic edict, do not lift and move around a pen on Shabbat. It's not, it was an innovation that came later. That's rabbinic law, and that's also the Talmud. But primarily, the function of the Talmud is to write down the oral Torah, and the oral Torah means the companion corpus of information that was transmitted orally to understand the written Torah, the very, very complex written Torah. That's just like a companion work. If you want to understand Torah, you have to have both written Torah and the oral Torah. One without the other won't work. Why? This is a little bit of a subtle point. If you have the written Torah without the oral Torah, you have no idea what it means. And there are some examples that in itself says you have no idea what this means unless you, right? Like the eating kosher meat, right? What makes a meat kosher? Well, it has an OU. It's kosher, right? That's in Deuteronomy, right? It's an explicit verse in Deuteronomy. You have to have an OU on all your packaged foods. Well, how do you? Well, it has to be kosher. Well, how do you make an animal kosher? Well, you have to eat a kosher animal. Okay, once it's a kosher animal, how do you process it? Well, you process it in a kosher way. Well, how do you do that? You go to a kosher slaughterhouse. Well, what do they do there? You know what they do there? They do a very rigid set of instructions of how they slaughter it and how they inspect it, and they look to see if it has any lesions. And there's 70 different kinds. Maimonides brings down 70 different kinds of illnesses and diseases that the animal could have that will render it unkosher. And you know what happens in a kosher slaughterhouse? When they slaughter the animal and they find out that it has a puncture in its lungs or it has cancerous tumors all over its internal organs, you know what they do with that animal?
Give it to goy.
They take it and put it in the goy pile because it's not kosher. Even though it was a cow. Cows are kosher. But it was kosher. It's a kosher species. But this particular animal is not kosher because it does not fulfill the kosher requirements that the Torah outlines. Now, where does it say in the Torah? It doesn't say in the written Torah. The Torah says just eat kosher food, as I instructed. Where's the instruction? It must be in some other accompanying document. Or not document, a set of instructions.
So when there's, in the Talmud, when the people are going back and forth discussing an issue, and they come up with a resolution, what is that example of? Is that like an example of rabbinical law?
Well, a lot of it is rabbinical law, but
like an example,
a lot of it is dealing with very, very fine nuances of oral Torah.
Like an example I was just reading was that you're probably familiar with. The reading the Megillah. Is it the 14th, 15th? And then they go back and forth with the rabbinic. Like one rabbi says this and one says that. So
actually,
what's that example?
Reading the Megillah. I feel like I'm inundating everyone with information here. Reading the Megillah is an example of a rabbinic mitzvah. Now, I want to separate between rabbinic mitzvah and rabbinic edict. Like not touching the pen on Shabbat, that's an edict. That's just a way to ensure that a Torah mitzvah is not transgressed. As opposed to a rabbinic mitzvah is a mitzvah that the rabbis themselves came up with on their own. Like the Megillah, that's to commemorate the Purim story.
So that's a mitzvah.
That's a rabbinic mitzvah. That's
it's not
right.
613 mitzvah.
It's not part of the 613, exactly. And there's 7 examples of those mitzvahs. For example, we have the mitzvah of lighting candles on Hanukkah. Remember, Hanukkah came much later. That's a mitzvah, right? It's a mitzvah to light the Hanukkah candles. Well, if Hanukkah's story happened in the 2nd century before the Common Era, well, everyone agrees that Mount Sinai happened more than 1,000 years earlier. How do you have a mitzvah commemorating a story that happened 1,100 years after the mitzvahs were given to us? The answer is because, yes, they didn't have the mitzvah beforehand, and this is a rabbinic mitzvah. So there are some examples of rabbinic mitzvahs.
So how long did it take to write the Talmud?
Oh, the Talmud is essentially the collection of every innovation, every insight, every clarification of the written Torah and the traditional interpretation or decryption of the written Torah up to that point. So essentially, it's the...
You just said interpretation.
Yeah, interpretation. I changed it to decryption because interpretation sounds like you're interpreting on your own. And even though, like I mentioned, there are some examples of
That's
where...
why that myth gets spread.
Yeah, okay, so it's a bad word, decryption.
Okay,
so we're clarifying it. I'm interpreting what I said. where it's an issue of semantics, but the connotation is very important.
Okay, so Moses comes down with the Ten Commandments.
Moses has the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments is just the beginning.
Okay.
Moses comes down. What is Moses do there? What does Moses study in those 40 days? That he does multiple times. He studies the oral Torah, which is what to do as a Jew. He comes down and starts teaching the Jewish people. They have an entire year at Mount Sinai, an entire year. Right? Well, actually, 10 days short of a year. So 350 days.
But by the
What are
time
they doing
you
there?
leave,
Huh? What are they doing? They're studying all day and all night. It was a mess. It was the largest national study house. Because the Jews now are absolutely fresh. They don't have anything. It's not like us, even if we're coming to Judaism later in life or we have some exposure, we know what a matzah looks like. I guess maybe they did as well. But we know what mitzvahs are. We've heard of Shabbos, If you just left Egypt, you know nothing, right? So this is a time that Jewish people have to learn. Learn what? Learn everything. Well, how do you learn? You start asking questions. You start being taught. Well, there's such chaos. Everyone knows nothing. You know what they do? They divide the nation into groups of 10, groups of 50, groups of 100, groups of 1,000, groups of 10,000, groups. We're familiar with that story.
Yeah.
What happens? You have every little group of 10 people. They study together. They have a question. They move it up to the group of 50, which is 5 of 10, and the group of 100, group of 1,000, 10,000, etc.
So you mentioned to Brad that there's no new addition to the Talmud. So when, for example, when you were talking about the war and people were like, you didn't take off school, you're like, oh, we're going to write something. I don't remember your little notes.
Oh, yeah.
So what if someone has a insight to a Talmud? What happens to that?
You write a book.
You write a book. It's not added to the collection.
No, that's right. And
what were those little things that you were writing? I mean, they were just.
Oh yeah, so these are like Torah insights and new stuff that maybe were never said before.
Right. So where is that
however, the role that we have today in our advanced Torah study is different than the role that the Talmud has.
Where does that collection of insights go?
Okay, so let's it's not lost. No, so let's start from a few generations or a few centuries earlier. So the time of the
My hair got stuck.
in medieval times, we see an enormous explosion of Jewish literature. Right? The medieval rabbis called the Rishonim. So people like Rashi. Everyone's heard the name Rashi? Rashi is the paramount commentator on all of Jewish writings. So all 24 books of the Bible, all the books of the Talmud, everything. And in fact, he's so indispensable that you literally cannot learn a page of Talmud. You cannot read Chumash. You cannot read the Torah, the Pentateuch, as they say in German, without Rashi. Rashi is the great commentator. He's one example. Maimonides from the same time period. And now there's so much literature that they're adding to this expanding corpus of Jewish writings. Well, what's their role? Their role is to decrypt the Talmud for us. Because the Talmud was such an enormous undertaking of writing down everything that it is, the entire collection of oral Torah, right? And it's so vast and so subtle that needs explanation as well. If you read the Talmud, you read one page of the Talmud, you're like, oh, I got one page of writing, and it's only a small sliver of the page is actually the Talmud. So you would think that you would read it like in 25 seconds. It looks like the size of an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal. It's nothing. You read it in 3-4 minutes, and then you start reading it, and you can't get in 3-4 minutes past one line because it's so dense that this argumentation is so it's so subtle, it's so nuanced.
And they tend to skip over what they consider to be the obvious point,
which you might be
obvious to a 5-year-old, right?
They're arguing the nuances.
Yeah,
but
so
that's obvious. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, and then for us, we're like, what's going on? You read the Talmud today without Rashi, you're totally lost. it's all French to you.
So,
Or if you know French, it's all
So what
Mandarin.
about all
It's all
the-
Mandarin. You know Mandarin, then it's all Swahili.
what about all the Rashis out there?
Huh?
I don't mean to say all the Rashis,
Where,
but you know,
where,
Rashi
where
was.
have all the scholars gone?
Yeah, where
Oh, like Rambam?
where are all the Rashi's insights
Modern
being
day.
consolidated?
Where are they consolidated?
Mhm.
What do you mean?
Like
Today?
all
You're
their-
asking
all
us
their
today?
journals,
Yeah.
where they put-
Rashi-
Today,
Rashi's-
there are more people studying the Talmud for scholarship purposes than any other item of wisdom out there. There's hundreds of thousands of people whose main occupation, or main goal in life, whose main focus and thing that they spend the most time with is studying Talmud.
Are there any,
And these are some of the greatest geniuses the world has ever seen. Today, studying the Talmud.
are there any holes in the Talmud?
What do you mean?
You've got, 63 books, you said?
Yes.
And it's all oral. And there are these groups of thousands of people on Mount Sinai starting the process.
Well, yeah, okay, I'm with you.
But if you have multiple people writing things down, how do they come together, and how do you know where one ends and when the other one starts?
What do you mean?
How did they know?
So, remember, this is an important point. Another important point we have to add to the conversation, the flavor here. What they're writing down is not ideas. These are laws that are applicable every single day. So, if I ask you, how do you know that the way you tie your shoes is the right way to do it? Maybe when you were told how to tie your shoes, when you were 6 years old, maybe you got it wrong. That's possible. Maybe we're all tying it wrong.
Yeah, but
So that's a good question, right? It's possible. When you have no idea when you learned how to tie your shoes. It's a long time ago. Maybe you got it wrong. Well, the answer is that you've been doing it every single day since then. You got it right. Right? The laws of the Talmud are not laws that are not applicable. These are laws that are applicable to Jewish people for millennia. Thus, and even today, every child knows what tzitzis looks like because their parent has tzitzis. And they know what a Shabbat, what a challah looks like because they've seen it. They have one every week. And they know what we say when we say kiddush because that's what they say every single week. And they know what matzah looks like not because they studied it in some book or it's written down in some book that's hidden in some. It's very dynamic. It's a way of life.
There was no seeing it before. This is all
That's why Moses had 40 years to teach Jewish people, and that's why Moses is in constant communication with God. And by the way, I'll tell you that the Talmud says that when Moses died, they forgot 300 laws. The day Moses died, they forgot 300 laws. Now, a little secret: whenever the Talmud says the word 300, it could be an exaggeration because there are many times that when the Talmud says a big number, it just picks 300. So if you have a little experience in Talmud, you'll see that they stabbed the guy with 300 spears, and the guy had 300 parables of a fox. And they asked Rabbi Akiva 300 questions. You see it again and again. You see it dozens of times in the Talmud where it says the number 300. So does the word 300 mean 300 exactly, precisely, or it means an enormous number? The latter is likely true. So it means that when Moses died, well, what happens? The direct channel to God, at least in the sense of Moses, a complete, clear channel, well, that's gone. So what do you have? Joshua? Joshua's great. He's not the prophet Moses was. The face of Moses is like the face of the sun. The face of Joshua is like the face of the moon, says the Talmud. Right? Moses is giving off his own light, and Joshua is just receiving from Moses, has no light of his own. And to us, we look at the sun and the moon, they look very similar. Right? If you look at the sphere of the sun and the sphere of the moon, they're exactly similar to us. Right? To the uninitiated, you see Moses and you see Joshua, they look the same. However, once you understand that Moses is the sun and Joshua is the moon, if I had like a picture of the moon and the sun, it's possible that you wouldn't know which one it is. You know that? I could take a picture of the sun or the moon, and I'll ask you, is this the sun or the moon? You wouldn't know. Why? Because there are certain times during the year that the moon is perfect, is a full moon, and you get the right angle. It looks as bright as the sun, or it looks like maybe the sun took a little off day. This little clouded day. Right? It's possible for us to not know. But there's a tremendous difference. So yes, there were some laws that were lost. And of course, throughout the generations, some subtleties and nuances were lost. That's possible. That's why we have machlokas. Machlokas is the idea like in the Talmud, we find a lot of disagreements. And the question is, how do disagreements come about? Now, the first documented disagreement that we have in actual applicable law is only 2,300 years ago. That's all we have. That's the earliest disagreement.
With Hillel?
Hillel and Shammai, that's right.
Yeah.
So essentially, we're able to go 1,000 years from Moses until the times of Hillel and Shammai without having any documented disagreements in practice of the law.
Which one was
We have other disagreements. We have like behavioral disagreements, maybe disagreements in leadership, in theory, but not in actual observance of Torah.
What was the disagreement in Mezuzah?
No. I don't remember what the Shammai and Hillel had 3 disagreements. That's it. They themselves.
I think it was which way to put the mezuzah.
Was that? What was? I'm
No,
asking,
that's
was
much.
that?
No, that's
that's
much later.
later?
That's later.
Sephardic and Ashkenazi.
Either way, this is a fun conversation. I was not planning on going this route, but I was saying it is interesting, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying there's been many books written on this subject. But either way, you should know that there are more people studying the Talmud, today than any other realm of wisdom. Which should make you... And these are all Jews, by the way. Well, not all Jews, because you have lots of people in South Korea studying...
China, yeah, he said,
Yes, they're studying
Yeah.
Talmud, and a lot of people just study Talmud just for the intellectual stimulation. But if you think about that, if I told you that the book that's being studied intensely, more than any other book, is actually written 1,500 years ago, it would make you wonder, like, how is it possible that something that's so old is yet so relevant, as to be the primary book of the scholars? That's, and these are Jews, by the way. These are, Jews are have a tendency to be creative and to be innovative, and you would think that an old book like that, why would the Jews cling to it so passionately and so many years after it's written? And the answer is because it's the most impressive and amazing book ever written.
I saw a picture of I guess it was the last Daf Yomi cycle, on the last day, and everyone gets together.
Yeah,
Like, I think it was in New York.
they do a giant stadium.
The whole stadium.
Yeah,
was just
it's
full
80,000 people. Yeah.
Why?
black hats and kippot. Yeah, it was just a stadium full of people reading the last page.
Well, like this. So
It's like tickets to the Super Bowl.
there are 2,711 pages of Talmud. Now, when I say Talmud, I say there's 63 books. The truth is, there's 60 books of the Mishnah. The Talmud is another element of the Mishnah. But the Talmud was only written, at least the Babylonian Talmud was only written on 39 books of the Mishnah. This probably sounds so complicated, right?
Yeah,
It is, right? Well, essentially, when the Mishnah was written, they were still in Israel. And therefore, they wrote everything, all the laws that applied to Jews. When they wrote the Talmud, they were already in Babylon. They only wrote the laws that applied to the people in Babylon. Thus, they didn't write all the agricultural laws. There's a lot of agricultural laws, but they only apply in Israel. You only fulfill them in Israel. That's right.
So the Talmud.
So there's a book of Talmud called Shvi'is. Shvi'is means the seventh, and it's referring to the seventh year, like Shemitah. We call it Shemitah, and the seventh year, and that's a mitzvah from the Torah to let your land lie fallow for every 7 years. Right now we're in the Shemitah year, and there's no Talmud written in it, and it's only Mishnah. Now that being said, it's still Mishnah, and a Mishnah, when there's still a lot of Talmud discussion about it, but there's not a dedicated book to the Talmud written. Why? Because it was written in Babylon 300 years after the Jewish people already left Israel en masse, and therefore to them the idea of observing Shemitah was very distant.
Can you explain the difference between Mishnah and Talmud?
Yeah. So Mishnah is laws.
Talmud.
So all the laws of the Torah, all the laws of the oral Torah, which is really the same thing. When I say Torah, I mean that together what it is God instructed us, and what was added by the rabbis later, either in the form of new rabbinic mitzvahs, which is only a couple, or the many rabbinic edicts, which is a lot of them. The laws were written down in Mishnah. Now, everything else that relates to the laws, which means all the broader applications of the laws, the sources of how these laws are found in the written Torah. Now, what does that mean? Like, if you have the oral Torah, these two companion works, one of them is the key, so to speak, and one of them is the encrypted work. They feed off each other. If you just had the written Torah without the oral Torah, you wouldn't know what the written Torah meant. If you just had the oral Torah without the written Torah, you wouldn't know is this substantiated in the written Torah. So essentially, they complete each other. The two elements that you need both of them, or else you have nothing. Thus, your oral Torah tradition is wonderful, and it's great. However, if it's not substantiated by the written Torah, then we can disregard it. So, how every law, how it trickles back to the written Torah, that link of showing you if I tell you the application of a law, I give you the interpretation of the law. I don't tell you where you find this verse in the written Torah, there's the link has to exist. Because if you have one without the other, well, then it's questionable. Where is this interpretation coming from?
How do we know?
How do we know? So that's all done in the Talmud. And you'll say, okay, well, just write the verses, right? You would think just write the verses. Well, remember that the written Torah is a very complex book. And if God wrote it, it's possible that the verses will be so harebrained we'll have no idea where the verses come from. And very, very often the verses are not a straight up verse. It's a word in Genesis and a word in Deuteronomy, and they have to be the same word. And that creates a linkage between those two elements, those two discussions, and therefore laws are transporting back and forth through that link of that same word. Like, there's no way anyone could have written this. Like, if any human could have written this. It's literally as complex as your brain. It's just mind-boggling. And you have these things going around like at rapid speeds. And you ask, one word here and the same word elsewhere, and then it's, we trade laws back and forth. We have a general principle and then an exception and then a principle and how that works and all these rules of derivation and what's called, the fancy word is exegesis, of how we actually derive laws from the written Torah. All that mathematics is done in the Talmud. So all the reverse engineering, so to speak, of understanding how an oral law is substantiated in the written Torah, all that is done in the Talmud, as an example. The broader applications of the law, the exceptions of the law, the various new developments of that law in the form of rabbinic law. Other examples, other related examples, questions about the law. Like, you have a law, well, what if some other, like, for example, there's a law that you have how to get married. Right? So how do you get married? So we know from the presentation of the rings. This is a good example here. Right? Presentation of the rings. So we know that there's chuppah, and then there's a ring, and the man says, "Harei at Israel," and they're married. Mazel tov. Fantastic. Where does that come from? So, in last week's parsha, in Deuteronomy, it says, Ki yikach ish isha, man marries a woman. And the word it uses is yikach. And then in Genesis, where Abraham buys a burial place for his wife Sarah. You guys remember that in Genesis? Abraham has a wife, Sarah, she dies. He's devastated. He's trying to find a place to bury her. And it says Abraham, he went and he bought a double-decker cave from a fellow named Ephron, and he paid him 400 silver coins. And the word that it uses is the same word that it used for marriage. So there, the rabbis in the Talmud tell you, by the way, this same word is not a coincidence. One of them has to be Genesis, one's in Deuteronomy. But in the Torah, right, the way the Torah writes things, written Torah, is not always straight up, as full sentences. It's one word here, one word there. They could be miles away from each other, but they're teaching you about the other. Thus, just like Abraham was able to buy that transaction happened with money, and he uses the same word, so too that marriage can happen with money. Like, that's how we know it. Now, that's how it's written in the written Torah. Now, if I just gave you the written Torah, back to our example, Brad, I gave you the written Torah, and I handed it to you. I say, okay, how do I get married? You would have no idea, right? How would you have no idea? Because it's encrypted. It's encrypted. It doesn't say explicitly get married by giving rings or giving money or monetary equivalence. You open the Talmud. Talmud says, "Oh, actually, that's how you do it." And in fact, we can work it back into the Torah. Okay, now says the Talmud. What if a guy says, "You know what? I want to marry half of the woman."
Half of the woman.
Yeah, I want to marry half of a woman. So he goes under the chuppah and says, "You know what? I want to marry half of you with this coin or with this ring." Now, obviously, the guy's got problems. That's established.
Top half,
I
bottom half,
don't
left
know.
side, the right side.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I don't know, but it's a discount.
Discount.
It's a good question. Why would someone do that? But the Talmud never asks that question. It's a question the Talmud never asks. Why would someone do that? Why? Because the Talmud's giving you law. It's not dealing. It deals with hypotheticals because hypothetical for a reason because it could potentially happen. So it could give you the most crazy hypotheticals because that's the job of the Talmud, to actually crystallize what the law is. So it'll ask, okay, what if the guy says, "I want to marry half of you," or "I want to marry all of you to half of me," or if he says, "I want to marry half of you with this ring and half of you with this ring."
Because that can happen, like if she's like half a slave or something, right?
That's like, what if a woman was owned a slave woman, so she wasn't Jewish, not a Jewish slave woman, non-Jewish slave woman. When they had slaves, by the way, even when they're non-Jewish slave women, they become Jewish. Let's push off the whole implications of Jewish slavery to a later date.
This is in 2 weeks ago, right? The Captives of War.
Well, that's a little bit different. That's the beautiful woman. He wants to marry the beautiful woman.
A captive.
Captive, a beautiful captive. That's right.
Doesn't have to be beautiful, right?
Well,
You're supposed to de-beautify her.
The Torah calls her beautiful. She started off as being beautiful at one point. Either way, so you have two partners. They own a slave woman, and this woman, she's a hybrid. She's kind of Jewish, but she's kind of not Jewish. Why is that? Because she started off as being not Jewish. They bought a non-Jewish slave, but a Jew cannot harbor a non-Jewish slave. So they actually convert her. So she's converted, but she's still called a non-Jewish slave. So she has all the laws of the Torah. So that she's Jewish. And if the woman decides, "I don't want to become Jewish," we have to sell her to someone else because you cannot harbor that kind of slave. But she's in this hybrid state. And let's say one partner decides, "I'm releasing her." And what happens when he releases her? She becomes a full-fledged Jew. The other partner says, "I don't want to release her. I like her still. I want her as a slave." So this is a woman. She's half a slave, and she's half a regular person, free man. Well, what happens? So there's so much in the Talmud written about that. And they'll say, "Well, how often does this really happen?"
It's a spider web and all these possibilities.
And if you think this is the beginning, I'm telling you, the question the Talmud asked, and how finely it deals with any potential. If an animal is the case in the Talmud, two animals, one animal is having a baby. They somehow interlock their legs, and the baby goes out of the mother, but right into the other lady, into the other animal.
Could happen.
It doesn't seem.
I don't think I get that channel.
That's on Animal Planet.
I thought this was a family show.
So
That is so far-fetched.
It's the
Oh, gosh,
amount
this,
of
makes me just,
far-fetchedness
exhausted.
is, and you know why? Because it's one of the methods Talmud employs is to always give you the edge, the most extreme case, and then you know everything else.
Right.
So, is there, because you said the Talmud is locked, you can't update it, nothing
Yes.
like that. Is there
Sealed.
a new and revised edition
Well,
for
in a weird.
things that they didn't think about?
Well, no, because even though they might have not have. This is another interesting development to your question.
Like electricity.
Exactly.
So
So
how
it's
did they
not.
do a revision to it?
Well, so they didn't revise. They don't revise the Talmud. The Talmud is
Update.
immutable.
Just a
Just
part two.
no, it's not a part two. It's not a part two. What they did, one of the genius of the Talmud, not the individual, but the brilliance of the Talmud is that via its analysis of a certain law, it's going to give you the principle of the law, not just the application, but the principle. And the principle is translatable to new applications. So if you understood the core of a certain law, right? You understood the principle, the immutable principle of the law, then you could, on your own, interpret it. How would this law apply to a new situation? So electricity is a good example. Electricity on Shabbat, let's say. So is it permitted to do any electricity or not? Well, let's understand the laws of Shabbat and then see how they fit in to the realities of electricity.
Wouldn't it be under certain conditions? Like if it prohibits the 39 categories?
Right, so the 39 categories, and each one of the 39 categories is an entire section of the Talmud. Well, not an entire book, but a section.
So what if you use electricity that doesn't prohibit one of the 39 categories?
Well, then it would be wouldn't be a problem. So that's why if you ever been to my house on Shabbat, there are lights on. I don't turn them on.
Or timers.
Or you could have a timer, so you can use electricity. The question is, can you turn on electricity? Well, what kind of electricity? Is there a heat element or not? Is it a fan, or is it a toaster oven? What's different? One is a heat element, one does not have a heat element. Okay, well, it creates a circuit. Well, does create a circuit, is that prohibited on Shabbat or not? And there are opinions that say that they understand the laws of building on Shabbat as creating something that wasn't there, and therefore, if there was no circuit, now there's a circuit. You're building on Shabbat. Thus, it would be prohibited. You're completing it, exactly. Now, what about if? So according to that analysis, this is one of the modern, the most modern contemporary halacha questions was the idea. Really, now it's a done deal. But the idea of electricity on Shabbos. So one opinion said that it's prohibited because of bone because you're building. You can one of the 39 categories of law on Shabbat is you can't build, and similarly you can't build, you can't destroy as well on Shabbat. So you can't build a building, you can't destroy a building on Shabbat. So if making a circuit, completing a circuit is building, and breaking a circuit is, well, then it'll be the opposite of that. You're breaking that was there. Well, then both turning on electricity and turning off electricity on Shabbat would be prohibited.
Unless it's like opening a gate. You're not building a fence by closing the gate.
Well, then, okay, you're not building a fence by opening.
There's a fence around my yard. I want to go outside my yard, so I open the gate, I walk out, and I close the gate.
Right, because
building.
You're not building. That's right. Yeah. So they have in hospitals in Israel, they have what's called they call it a grumma switch. A grumma means an indirect activity. So if I have an indirect way of creating the circuit, I'm not building the circuit. I'm just I'm moving away the barrier that was preventing the circuit from being completed. Right? Well, then it's a little bit better because I'm not completing the circuit myself. I'm not building the circuit myself. I'm just removing the obstacle for the circuit to be created on its own.
Is that where the infrared?
Well, it's a loophole, but they do it for hospitals when they need to do it anyhow. They minimize the amount of Shabbat desecration that they would do.
That's
Now,
for life.
Save a life.
That's for life, though.
Right, so
that
Save a
overrides.
life.
But you can see a loophole as a way of honoring, because you're saying I'm going to the trouble to go through a loophole
It's not a loophole.
instead of just breaking the rule.
It's not a loophole. It's a creative way to not desecrate the Shabbat any more than you need to.
So if I made a circuit with a non-ferrous barrier, and I removed that non-ferrous conductor, and then I have a circuit, that's what you're saying.
Yeah. So that would be a grumma switch. So
That-
that would listen. No one says that that's permitted straight up. What they do say is that it's better off than building the circuit yourself, and that's why in hospitals and nursing homes in Israel, this is common. Every one of them has this kind of.
What about water? When you're turning off and on a faucet?
So what's the problem? The problem is the pump.
A faucet, pump, whatever.
So that's all these questions are discussed in great detail.
So how is it different?
I don't know the science
But
behind
water
it.
would be indirect because, you might be
You're
like
opening-
like our house. We have a well, so we have a pressure tank. I'm getting water,
Oh,
so it is lowering the
municipal.
pressure, but I'm not the one turning on the pump.
Okay.
It's a pressure.
What about
switch.
municipal water? The water has to be into my house somewhere.
Yeah, but it's being pumped regardless. No, when I
But I'm
open
opening
the
up a
spigot,
gate.
when I open the spigot, I'm just allowing what would have come in regardless. It's being pumped regardless.
As
I'm
long
not
as it's
pumping
cold
it.
water, I guess. And you
Yeah,
gotta
so
turn on your
right.
heater and
That's
whatnot.
why that's why we turn on. We only use the cold water, but not the hot water, because then I'm heating up the water. And even if I'm not actually turning on the heater, but I'm causing cold water to go into the vacated space of the water heater, and thus I'm heating up water on Shabbat. You can't cook water on Shabbat. So cold water, yes. Hot water, no. Now, what about if we say let's say we assume that electricity on Shabbat is not building? Well, then what is it? Well, maybe it's making a fire.
Metal fire.
If it's making a fire, then you can't make a fire, but you cannot extinguish a fire as well. Those are also two of the 39 prohibited acts on Shabbat.
Just keep your car on the whole day. At night.
Well, but then you're even if you're keeping it on, if you're actually driving the car, that is contributing towards the fire, so to speak.
If it's an electric car.
If it's electric, but
Yep, I just keep it on all night. I just plug it in. I'm good to go.
but are you in the car? Are you driving the car?
No, I put it on before Shabbos.
Oh, you're good to go. Of course. If it's just charging on Shabbos, like
No,
you're charging
no.
your phone on Shabbos.
What's the difference between charging and driving it?
Well, when you're
You have to
pressing the
unplug
button, what's happening electric wise? Are you transmitting electricity? That would be the question.
Am I transmitting electricity?
Are you increasing or decreasing the amount of electricity needed?
Yes.
Well, you're opening
That's
and
the
closing
problem.
circuits.
I'm
all
opening and
day.
closing a
So
circuit.
there you go.
And also you still have spark plugs in an electric car, so that's fine.
Depending on if it's a gas and electric car.
Yeah, but you
But
see,
if it's
like,
like the
No,
bulb,
you still have spark plugs regardless.
not in a pure electric car.
No,
Full electric doesn't have a motor.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
it's a generator.
Tesla.
That's
Yeah.
No
interesting.
motor.
right.
It's only batteries.
Wow.
So
That's
Yeah, so batteries is
But
a
either-
prime example though.
either way,
That is-
if
I'm not okay with that.
You're getting into nerdy engineering.
I know, but to
what if you
answer the
can-
question, if you understood the core principle of the law of Shabbat, then to apply it, right, that's the skill of the rabbi. The rabbi's skill is going to be to take a certain law and apply it to a new situation that hasn't necessarily been addressed in the Talmud. So even though there are situations that are not addressed, the Talmud doesn't talk about electricity, ever. Yet, there's been more books written about electricity in the Talmud than, than Harry Potter.
Because
There's
it
only
affects
8 or
our
9 of
lives.
that.
I mean,
Huh?
it affects our life tremendously.
And exactly, and
We
it's
rely
pulling out
on-
all these principles because if you really understood the Talmud and you understood all the elements to the principle of the law expressed in the Talmud, all you have to do is to apply that, and then someone will say, "Well, maybe that's not a good application," and that's where the debate would come about. You were saying, sorry.
No, it's just
So-
very complicated.
A question.
Go ahead.
Need your rabbi skills here. I will be traveling, so I won't get to hear the chauffeur. Will YouTube count?
Well, you
Where-
that's
where
not
are you
gonna count.
traveling?
You have to actually hear the chauffeur.
Bloomington, Illinois. No
I'm
synagogue.
sure there's gonna be something up there.
There's
What
Bloomington?
about in Peoria?
Isn't there a university there?
mm-hmm.
There is. One of my friends is the rabbi in the university there.
So they'll have.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Yes.
He can pull some strings for you.
Okay. That's where I'll be. So.
Is the was that your university in
Well,
Indiana?
it's like the university right across the street from the hotel where I stay.
Well, there you go. So,
Awesome.
a friend of mine who was a colleague of mine in Israel,
Mhm.
he is the rabbi there. How funny is that? He's
You
a
wanna
great
throw
guy,
his
also.
name out?
Huh?
You want to throw his name out?
Sure. I think it's my friend. Because the reason why it's confusing to me in my head because a different one of my friends was the rabbi before that,
Mhm.
and then because there's no Jewish schools there, he moved out, and then a second friend of mine came in, and his name is Hoffman, David
Okay.
Hoffman.
So there is a Hillel or something.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he has a shul. He's having a minyan, and he has a chauffeur, and he's giving a lecture, and there's prayers, everything.
Where is this?
How do you like that, huh?
Where is this?
Bloomington,
But
Illinois.
YouTube wouldn't count.
I'll be traveling.
No, you're not
for
listening to the
5
show.
days.
So, the laws of electricity, where are they found? Because they're not found in the Talmud.
Well, they are from the Talmud. Maybe you might not know. They're not applied in the Talmud, but the laws are there.
Where
the principles.
Where are the collections of these interpretations of like electricity consolidated?
Well, there is.
I guess that's what
There's
our questions
The
are.
earliest book was written in the 30s. Electricity in the applications of electricity on Shabbos. It was
But I'm
actually
just
written
talking-
by a 20-year-old.
But not only electricity,
A
but
20-year-old. Let me finish my point.
okay.
It's a remarkable story. It was written by a 20-year-old who went on to be one of the great halachic authorities of his time. He was Rabbi Auerbach.
Four?
I'm sorry?
What was his name?
Auerbach.
Orbach.
Yeah.
Oh, just remind me of four.
So when he was in his 20s, he was only like 21. He wrote an entire 2-volume book on all the applications of electricity shops. That being said, he's not the only one who wrote it. There's been many, there's a lot written on it. And in fact, I once saw a compendium of analyses of electricity and Shabbos, but it was written in Hebrew.
So from the time electricity was invented, created,
Well, it wasn't invented; it was harnessed.
to the 30s, no scholar commented.
Well, remember, it's important to realize here, even though it might have been discovered and harnessed in some capacity, it wasn't necessarily in every shtetl in Europe, Some shtetls today don't have electricity. Right? So it became a big deal as more and more people were exposed to this new technology. What's the deal? So I'm saying that's the earliest book that I know of. There might have been other, at least responsa. This is a dedicated book to the subject. So I think it was a 2-volume book dedicated to the subject. Very dense, very intense book. I don't know the history of responsa literature on electricity and Shabbos. I would bet anything I own that this is not the first person to ever write about it. I think it's the first book of its kind. There's been more books hence, but I'm sure there were questions asked about that before that. So yes, people that had exposure to electricity, they would know what to do even at that time. Either way, there is one opinion, for example, that says that electricity is not a problem on electricity on Shabbos, provided there's no heat element, is only a problem of molid. So molid is a fifth problem. So if we said in Shabbat, so there's the building, there's destroying, there's lighting, kindling a fire, and extinguishing a fire. Those are the 4 things that we mentioned till now. Well, there's a 5th one, and that would be molid. Molid is more of a general principle on Shabbos. Molid literally means to have a baby. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have a baby on Shabbos, because otherwise I'd be in trouble. Because I've had a baby on Shabbos myself, with a minor assist from my wife, of course. But I myself was born on Shabbos. So it doesn't mean you cannot have a baby on Shabbos. What it means is you cannot engender some new entity that wasn't there yesterday. So if my fan is off and I turn it on, well, now there's a new reality that wasn't here yesterday. So it would certainly be molid. Now the problem is that, or the question is, well, if it's not a heat element, so it's not a fire, and we don't assume that it's boning, that it's building, well, what about turning off a fan on Shabbos? That's the only instance where there may be a question of permitting it.
But the fan was there yesterday and had potential.
True,
yesterday.
it had potential, but it.
I mean, you're not changing a reality.
You're not, but you're bringing a new reality that wasn't there beforehand. You're making a status change, so to speak. It was a fan, and now it's a fan that's blowing air and whatever. You're turning on a function, basically. Now, that would be prohibited. The question is, what about turning off a fan? If it's not destroying, and there's no heat elements, therefore it's not extinguishing, well, you're not engendering something. So what is it?
It's a heat element.
So, I don't know. There are heat elements.
Yeah, it's a motor.
So
Motors have give off
Can't you
heat.
just
The
leave it on
windings of
and
the
then not
motor.
worry about it?
Uh-huh.
Can't you just leave it on
You could.
before Shabbat and then
You could. The question is that might be the only instance. So I don't know. You're the engineer. I have no idea what actually happens in the fan.
I think
So
it's
there's a
motor
heat-
windings and they get warm.
yeah.
So when you say heat element, are you talking about the intent to heat, or a byproduct of a motor?
I don't know what I mean. Sorry. Because I study this at a perfunctory study of the issue, because I don't understand the science at all, like the whole electrons
Because the
and all that
function of a
nonsense.
fan isn't to heat; it's
True,
creating
obviously.
heat as a byproduct.
As a byproduct. I don't know. This is a good question. I have no idea what I'm saying.
So if you can't create or destroy,
You
right?
cannot build.
Build.
create,
Destroy.
build, destroy.
Crush, kill, destroy.
Kindle a fire, extinguish a fire, or engender something new.
But it has to be constructive destruction, right?
Yes.
Like you could randomly just break something and
Well, yeah.
What about tying your shoelaces?
What about it? So you can't do a double knot.
it's not a
Huh?
professional.
What?
It's not a professional.
So what they say is that if you do a one knot, you're doing a double knot, you're a problem. Because one of the two of the categories prohibited acts on Shabbos are two of the prohibited acts are number one making a knot and number two untying a knot.
Loafers.
Loafers.
Right? So if you make a single knot, well, that's more of a temporary knot. That's not a problem. What about a tie? Let me make a tie in Shabbos. I know people that make their ties before Shabbos and then don't actually untie it or just pull it down and pull it up, like that. Because they say that maybe if I undo my tie like that, ooh, that was good. If you undo your tie, you just undid a knot. You untied a knot. And if you make a tie, well, you just made a knot.
I guess our son will be lucky because he does untidy
He
his
hadn't done
ties.
his in like 5 years.
And they're all hanging, all still tied.
But, okay, so if it goes down to the tie, then, sorry mom,
Start wearing a dress.
sex, where you have the possibility of creating life,
Well, what about it?
is it allowed?
That's a double mitzvah.
Well,
right.
why would it not be allowed?
It's required, right?
It's not required.
Because then you're-
Well, maybe required in a certain.
Well, it's up in
Because then you're building.
You're building.
Well,
you're
well,
creating.
well.
You're doing something with the possibility of building
Okay,
life.
but let me ask you a different question. Can you eat on Shabbos?
I
Can
think that
you
depends on who
study
asks.
Torah on Shabbos because you're building a better world? That means when I say building, it means that the way it's described is laying down bricks to build. It doesn't mean building in the sense, in either the reproductive sense or in the world building or team building exercises. Faith building activities. Those are all okay.
But how is closing a circuit considered building?
No, it would be. Well, that's a question.
Versus
There's books and books and books written about that. How do we apply the law of the Torah? How do we first understand what the Talmud is saying, the principle, and all the information we have about the principle, and then the application? That's why it is very complicated.
I'm going to build a circuit for non-conductive inhibitor, and then remove it during Shabbos.
Well,
and then I'm good to go.
Well, you're not the first guy to think of this.
But that's what you're saying. That's what they use.
Yeah,
in
but then
applications,
it's a grumma. It's a grumma. Then it's indirect.
which is allowed.
Which is no. No one said it's allowed. It's better. It's better to do with a
Oh,
grumma.
it's better.
So it's better if you're going to desperate spot, better to do it with a grumma.
Like
Like,
hospitals.
like if
because
you
they
have
just-
to
Okay.
save a
But
life,
they
you
do
just
that
have
where
to do something.
it's necessary because
Yeah.
they're dealing with
Right. So like
care
they
patients
used to
and-
say like in the Russian army, in the Tsar's army, they would take Jewish boys, and have them, work in the army, and then they would have to write stuff on Shabbat. What happens if you force to write Shabbat, or else you get shot? You got to write it on Shabbat. Well, do you need to write with the right hand? Do you write with the left hand? It's better to do something in an indirect way or in a way that's non-standard, because then it's less of an encroachment on Shabbat.
Wait, say that again.
Next time you go to turn the light on, use
Do
your
with
left
your
hand.
left hand.
If you
Seriously?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's interact.
Oh yeah.
Wait, I have a
Do
question.
you do that at home?
Of course.
Well,
Yeah.
that's
Go
fine.
ahead.
So you say the Talmud
Just so
is
we
an
don't have to go to-
interpretation
yeah, that's when we
of
go to bed.
direct laws of the Torah. So then why
It's
are there
dark.
two?
Two Talmuds? Oh, so this is a question that also wasn't addressed. I was going to address this as
Babylonian
well.
and
And the
So
Jerusalem.
yes, so the Jerusalem
Want some more?
Talmud, of course, was written
You want some more?
in.
Not yet. I don't know.
You look kind of sleepy.
Of course, the Jerusalem Talmud, Brad, was written. What city was Jerusalem Talmud written in?
Babylonian.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant you were looking for a
No,
year.
no. In what city? Of course,
1812.
of course, it was written. No, it wasn't.
No,
It's a
it
trick
wasn't?
question. It was written. It was written in Tiberias, but it was written in Israel. Now that was written much earlier. So Jerusalem Talmud essentially wrote down the Talmud, but it wrote it down in a different kind of way than the Babylonian Talmud. So yes, Babylonian Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud essentially set out to do the same function, to write on the Talmud. However, the methodology of writing it down was slightly different, and therefore, like the whole, if you read Talmud today, it's very dynamic. It's dynamic in a sense because it gives you dialogue, it gives you discussion, it gives you argumentation, it gives you the position of the individual or the stance that's ultimately disproven.
Changed?
No, it didn't change. It's just the presentation is very different. Presentations.
So, like, what would
There
be-
are cases that
What
we
would be
do
the
have.
difference?
Huh?
What would be the difference?
So, for example, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
In the Talmud, we say Talmud, we typically mean Babylonian Talmud.
Okay.
When you want to talk about the Jerusalem Talmud, you say Jerusalem Talmud.
Okay.
In the Babylonian Talmud or the Talmud, the Talmud brings it's very much in a narrative dialogue format. So it would say, "Oh, this rabbi said that this particular law is derived from this particular verse."
Okay.
Which is a very way that would typically start. The other guy says, "Well, how could you use that verse? We use that verse, and the other end of the Talmud for something else." And thus, one verse, one law. You can't learn two verses from one law. There's, well, no, that other law that you will learn the other end of the Talmud from this verse, I learned from a second verse. He says, "Oh no, that verse I need for a third law. Oh no, that law I need for that law I derive from a third verse." And if you go on like that, and you have to piece it all together.
And that's the
Gotcha.
rabbinic.
Huh?
And
That's the rabbinic portion.
No, that's not rabbinic portion.
That's
That is,
interpretation.
it's not interpretation. It's linkage. Linkage of a oral law, a law,
Okay, so
that's
oral
wait,
law
that's
instruction.
the Babylonian Talmud.
That's
What's
right.
the Jerusalem Talmud?
Means the Jerusalem Talmud is much more rigid. Much more rigid. It's not going to give you that whole dynamic.
So it just
format.
says this is this.
This
and
is the way
that's
it is.
Yeah,
That's right.
It's more orthodox.
I wouldn't say it's orthodox. It's more. It's
It's less explanatory.
It's not less explanatory. It's much easier, I think, in a sense.
Less argumentative.
So no more variables.
But also, it's not going to dwell so much on the positions that are ultimately disproven. So if one rabbi, we have instances in the Talmud where the rabbi says, this is the law. It's like, oh, is this the law? Well, let me ask you 5 questions. It goes, question number 1. He says, I can answer up the question. Oh, question number 2 from other than the Talmud. Oh, no, I can answer that. Question 4, 5, 6. After 7 questions, they ask him a question, he's handcuffed, he can't answer it. He says, we have thoroughly disproven his position. Happens very, very often in the Talmud.
So
And
what-
say, okay, if it was disproven, let's edit it. We did all the work now. It's been disproven. We don't need it. We can take it out. They don't do that apparently in the Talmud.
No
the
Mythbusters?
Babylonian. Okay.
So
they
the
tell
Babylonian
you
Talmud
what's
will
wrong
also
as well,
give
what's
you.
right, and in Jerusalem they just say this is right. Okay.
Yes,
question.
yes, it's not in the same format. But that also gives us a little bit of an insight as to how it actually is all so to answer your question, it was updated, so to speak. You asked the question.
Babylonian one was the updated
you asked-
version.
You asked the question like 40 minutes ago, and then you got sidetracked.
Until it got written down.
So-
it's a good sidetrack though. It's
Yeah, it was an okay
informational
sidetrack, right? So we have the Jerusalem Talmud was the first attempt to actually write the Talmud, and it's an incredible work of scholarship. Once again, it's thousands of rabbis, essentially dedicating their lives to it. And in fact, there are, out of the books of the Mishnah, the 63 books, there are many books. Remember, this is written in Israel, and therefore they wrote books on all the agricultural laws have Talmud, accompanying Talmud with them. Remember I told you earlier, the Babylonian Talmud didn't spend time writing a Talmud on the laws of agriculture that didn't apply to them? Well, the Jerusalem Talmud is written in Israel, and the laws of agriculture did apply to them. So they did indeed write books like Talmud, companion books to the Mishnah, on the laws of agriculture.
Is that why Shemitah's not in the Babylonian one?
Right, that's what Shemitah is on. But there is a book called the Talmud of Shvi'is, or Shemitah. That's in Jerusalem Talmud.
So it is.
It's there. It's there. That's right. But you don't find it in the Babylonian Talmud. It wasn't written in the Babylonian Talmud.
You just said it was
It was in the Jerusalem, not the Babylonian.
it's in Jerusalem, not the Babylon.
That's right.
Not one of the 63 books is about Shemitah. Is that what you just said?
60 books of the Mishnah. How many of those Mishnahs was the Talmud added to it? So 39 is it. 39 in the Babylonian Talmud.
39 are in the Talmud.
Don't
That's
leave
right.
that.
39 books. Books
Okay.
of the Mishnah were later on, the laws, quote
At
unquote,
your own
were
risk.
added. The Talmud was added to those laws, to those books. So, for example, if you could learn the Mishnah of the book of Megillah, right? And you read just the Mishnahs, just the laws. And then you can learn the Talmud as well, because there was a supplementary Talmud written to the
Okay, so
Mishnah.
the
Makes
obvious
sense?
question: why was there not Talmud for every 64 books?
Well, there was. It's just they didn't. I just say, there is, so to speak, but it wasn't necessarily written down. And the reason why it wasn't written down was because it wasn't applicable to them. Now, I would argue
So, but if you combine the Babylonian and the Jerusalem one, then
you'll
you would
have
all
almost
64?
almost all of them.
Okay.
Almost all. That's
Because
right.
they didn't know what they didn't know.
Well, they knew it. I guess maybe they didn't study it as often, or they didn't study it as intensely, or they didn't. I don't know. It's a good question.
Why wouldn't they? Because we study a lot of laws that we don't use today.
Yeah,
So why
They-
would they? Why would
and
I guess why Shemitah not like sacrifice or not?
yes,
Yeah, they don't
Things
exactly.
like that.
They
Yeah.
sacrificial wouldn't be
that-
applicable either.
but they did include that. So, and
So
it's
wh-
interesting.
Because they expect it to be necessary
Well,
at some point.
but
So
if-
Well, they
they
would
don't want to
expect
forget it all.
They would expect the
No, but
agricultural.
what I'll tell you is also that in Babylon, the laws of sacrifice applies to people in Babylon as well, because they would go bring sacrifices to Israel, as opposed to the laws of agriculture. You know,
They wouldn't do Shemitah because it's not actually in the land.
yeah, it's not actually the land. So
Okay.
if you went multiple times a year from your little farmhouse in Babylon to Israel to do sacrifices, you would need to know the laws of sacrifice as well. You won't necessarily need to know the laws of agriculture because you're not actually planting on your vacation, right?
Right. if
Even
you're-
people that have gardens around their house don't actually plant when they're on vacation. Is that right?
But when you're entering the land of Israel, when you're there, giving the sacrifice, you have to know it. You have to know what fruits and stuff you can and cannot eat. If they're
Okay,
doing
well,
it right, and blah,
the
blah.
people knew it. The question is why they not write the Talmud for it? But the sages of the Talmud, they knew it all. Because very often, as I guess is emblematic of our discussion, that it kind of meander in different directions. You know, like we talk one thing, we move into the next thing, and eventually get back to what we started talking about, which is I gave up on it because we're not going to actually talk about it tonight.
What is it? We can start part one.
No,
part
no,
two.
no. We'll do part one next week, I guess, or part two, whatever, after the holidays. I don't know. But the Talmud would very often pivot on means if let's say it's talking about the laws of, I don't know, we said marriage, let's say. So it might be talking about marriage, and then because it asks a certain question, it'll start talking about something else, and it'll move away from the core subject until it finishes whatever tangent it went off onto, and then it goes back to the core discussion.
It's okay.
You right there, Brad?
Yeah, I thought something gone before.
That's okay. It was for Cody here.
I'm good today.
I got both blankets out for you.
Thank you.
Well, you got a whole basket right there for it too.
I have a question. So
Go
you
ahead.
said that all these insights that people have been logging for all these years. Has there been any kind of inkling that maybe one of these might be one of those 300 laws that maybe was
That would-
lost after Moses? I mean, is anybody been kind of, what this is maybe?
That's a good question.
Because you said you have a
can we
lot
ever
of
get them
scholars.
back?
You have a
Can
lot
we
of
ever get them back?
scholars.
Well, and also remember, there's the idea of a prophet. So even though we have no prophet like Moses, but the idea of God giving direct communication, or at least nearly direct. I wouldn't call it direct because only Moses had completely direct communication, like man talking to his fellow, face to face. God says face to face, I talk to Moses. But everyone else, they have some sort of direct connection. You know, it's a little bit more indirect, but it's still direct communication. That obviously would prevent mistakes. You know, if you were able to ask God a question of a certain law, how do we apply this law? Then it would be a very easy way to ensure that the law doesn't get corrupted. You know, so we actually don't find throughout the times of the prophets, so long as there's a prophet around, we don't actually find any machlokas. It's interesting if you actually map out historically, you know, chronologically, of when the last prophets we've had, but when that ends, and then when we find the first disagreements, they're almost touching each other. Essentially, prophecy ends, and then suddenly disagreements abound. Well, it starts off slowly, and there's a trickle, and then we get some more of them. Because a prophecy is essentially a built-in verification method.
It's like a double checker. Well, the ultimate checker.
Yeah, well, but the ultimate is really when the Jews actually observe and live that law. It gets applied. It's not just an idea that needs to be checked. But it's a safety, preventative measure to make sure that if something does get lost, you could check on it. By the way, they also had something called the Urim V'Tumim. Who here has heard of the Urim V'Tumim? That's right. So that this Kohen Gadol, the high priest in the first temple at least, he had a breastplate, and it's like a box, and there's and there's 12 stones, and on the 12 stones are written 12 names, and then he would ask questions, and then the letters of the stone would illuminate. It's kind of like it's pretty incredible. It's like magic. The letters of the stone would illuminate to answer his question. So, famous story we find with
David or Saul that didn't listen to the breastplate.
well, Saul. Saul had a bunch of issues with not listening. He listened to the prophet as well. That's why he lost his monarchy. So, Hannah, the great hero, the great heroess. Is that what it's called? How do you say female hero? Huh? Heroine. The heroine of the Jewish people, not the heroine you're thinking of.
What do you think was that one?
Heroine with an E of the Jewish people. So we know the book of Samuel talks about this woman, the mother of Samuel. So she goes to the temple, and she's praying because she's barren. She has no children. And Eli, who's the high priest at the time, he thinks that this woman's drunk. She's a drunkard. And he says, "What are you drinking here? There's the temple. You can't come in. You can't come in to the temple when you're drunk, when you're inebriated." Now, why did he think that she was drunk? Because his breastplate lit up with the letters Shin, Chaf, Kaf, and a Resh and a Hey, which reads Shikora. She's a drunkard. The word Shikora means drunk. Shikar. There you go, Shikar. And Shikora means a female, the feminine by Hebrew as masculine and feminine, just like Spanish has, right? So if a male drunk and a female drunk, a male drunk call it a shikor or a shikar, and a female drunk would call it a shikora. So he's like, oh, she's drunk. But in fact, he should have scrambled the letters as a kaf, and then a sin, and then a shin, and then a resh and a hey. And then would have read Kisara, like Sarah, a righteous woman who's barren. How cool is that? So that's obviously not, if it's up to, the Kohen Gadol is the spiritual leader of the people. He has to know exactly what the message is. But it is some sort of divine message that you can have. It's still pretty cool.
It's a prophecy that got a message wrong. We were looking for an example.
Well, it's not really, I wouldn't call it prophecy.
That's
It's something like that. It's some sort of prophetic.
It's not through a person though. It's through a thing.
Yeah, it's
like a. You can consider it like a dream. It's not really a thing. It's a.
Yeah, but it's not prophecy. It's not prophecy. I say it's maybe a let's call it low level prophecy. Now you have other things. You have low level prophecies in the form of a bat kol. Have you heard the term bat kol? Or a bas kol?
You say in a sentence.
Right. Bat kol means the daughter of a voice. That sounds weird. It's like a reality show. That's what it means literally. That's what it means literally. Now, what that means is that there is an element of prophecy called kol, a voice. You hear a voice from heaven. And a bat, which means a minor of that. A variant, but a lower level of that level of prophecy, what we call a bat kol. Daughter of that, or the minor of that. A minor variant of that kind of voice. And that we find way after prophecy is already obsolete. we find people having bat kol. So it's like prophecy. I won't call it prophecy, but it's similar in the way that it's some sort of.
It's like an echo.
Well, like between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, right? Wasn't there a voice?
That's right. That's how we know the halacha is like Beis Hillel, right? The halacha follows like Beis Hillel, right? Even though both of these are the word of a living God, but the halacha is like Beis Hillel, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Like this one's right and this one's right, but
that's right.
This one's.
So we know that the schools
In
of
this
Shammai
era,
and Hillel,
right?
they had arguments.
In this era.
Yeah,
In
but
this
there was
era,
a voice. So
in
after-
the Mashiach era, you follow Shimon, right?
Shammai, right?
Shammai.
There's a
Okay, I got you.
tradition
Is that
that.
what the building was shaking? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, the building shake is another example. That's with Rabbi Eliezer.
Ah.
Rabbi Eliezer, he's arguing with the rabbis, and he says, "Oh, I'm right." He's like, "No, we're the majority." He's like, "No, but I'm still right, and if I'm right, let there be a prophetic voice." And suddenly everyone hears this prophetic voice, a bat kol. And if I'm right, let the river start flowing the other way, and if I'm right, let the tree be uprooted, and the tree gets uprooted, and the river starts flowing the other way, and if I'm right, let the walls of the basement cave in, and the walls start caving in.
Okay.
They're like, doesn't matter. Don't bring us your proofs. Torah's not in the heavens. We have a rule majority rules, and therefore, this is the way it is. And if you don't agree, we're going to excommunicate you. And that's what they did.
That's where the majority wins, right?
Right.
It
And
doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's
Crazy.
And I'll tell you that the Sanhedrin, the term Sanhedrin, if you've heard that term, has anyone here heard that term?
Yeah. It's a
It's a
head
court.
70.
The 100? What was
No,
that?
It's a high
71.
court, right?
71, yeah. Their role,
Supreme Court.
the Supreme Court, the
They're
High
the
Court,
ones
whatever.
who left Israel, right?
Well, it eventually left Israel.
Or Jerusalem.
They live-
Jerusalem, left Jerusalem. I mentioned that. They left Jerusalem. That's right. Very good. Good call back there, Brad. Their role is expanded when prophecy ends. Prophecy ends, and then right at the end point of prophecy, so if you heard the name Ezra, you ever heard that name? Ezra is one of the last prophets. And everyone can sense the prophecy is waning. The prophets are getting weaker, like the degree of prophecy. And it's about to end. He reinforces the power of the Sanhedrin by establishing what is known as the Men of the Great Assembly. Ever heard that term? You heard that, right? That is essentially the Sanhedrin that was always in existence. However, it got a much more important role because now, if there's no prophecy, there's no Moses, there's no breastplate. We essentially lost our connection to our divine channel to get answers to our questions. Well, now we're on our own, basically. We're on our own, and the Sanhedrin is going to play the pivotal role of adjudicating any questions that come up. And thus, from then on, we see lots of disagreements amongst people, but we also have the method of determining what course of action we take once a disagreement happens.
So a question, what is the significance of the number 7? Why 70?
Well, there's a simple and there's a complex answer. Which one do you want? Both. How about both? Well, the simple answer is that is the size of the group of people that God tells Moses to arrange. The Sanhedrin is the longest serving judicial body in world history. Why? Because they're established by Moses, and so about 1300 BCE, and they continue till 400 of the Common Era. So 1700 years uninterrupted. Body of 71. It's really more, but 71 at least on the court itself. Judges. So it's I believe it's in Bamidbar in Numbers 10:16. God tells Moses, "Go gather 70 judges, and that will be the Sanhedrin." So 70 plus Moses is 71.
Did they go up on the mountain and eat lunch or something? Wasn't that?
Maybe. They go eat.
I don't know if they ate, but they had to go up on the mountain and.
Yeah, well, I guess they were consecrated.
with a group.
Okay, and then another question. You say everyone
So-
starts disagreeing, right?
Well,
Because the profits go away and everyone's like, oh wait.
not only that, disagreements are able to. We're human, right? Disagreements are going to happen, right? Lack of clarity. I give a class here. If I separate all of you into if I interrogate each one of you on your own, which by the way I'm not planning on doing yet, pending good behavior, I'm not going to do this. But if I did, and I would ask you detailed questions about tonight's discussion, what are the odds that everyone will say the same thing?
0.
Very unlikely, right?
It's slim.
You might get the flavor, you know. So, let's say it wasn't just 1 hour and a half long discussion, but it was 14 years. If we were studying together for 14 years, 18 hours a day.
Goodness.
If that's what we did. It's not 1 hour, it's, do the math, 18 times 365 times 14. How many, what's the calculator there? Let's do it. So if you have 18 hours a day times 365, let's do 364 because you're not going to study on Tisha B'Av, times 14. So we're talking about 91,728 hours.
Assuming that no one kills each other in the process.
Right. That was the 91,728. That was basic requirements for anyone to be considered anything in the Jewish people. And we have millions and millions and millions of such people. Solely dedicated. They're not sitting and eating, no offense to anyone here, but when they're studying, they're not sitting and like eating food and they're sitting back like we are on couches. Like they are investing their life in the pursuit of scholarship. If you had that degree of dedication and time, and then we separate everyone and interrogated them, what are the odds that there would be disagreements? Well,
Probably
then
even more.
that there will be disagreements.
Huh?
But then why do you say more? You have more time to clarify every issue, every potential
Yeah, but
issue.
you have
More
more
time
time to
together.
get more questions that you can
Yeah,
argue
but then
on.
you ask
Yeah.
your questions. You have 14 years to study. You've dedicated, it's a chunk of your life. You know?
It's a chunk, but you're still going to see it different as another person.
Yeah, maybe slightly differently. Maybe you have a different flavor to it. But to any just broad disagreements in a principle of a law is very hard to find. You might have a different way of expressing it. But if two students have a completely different immutable principle that they're going to take away, well, that's a problem, right?
Well, actually, the more you get into the subject, right?
Go ahead.
Like chemical engineering, I did spend 5 years going into it, right?
How many hours a day? How many days a week?
A lot.
Yeah, probably minimal, but but the more I studied, actually, the more questions I had.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the
Of
more,
course.
so like if I spent however many hours doing it, I would, like
And
Miriam said, I might generate more
and that's
questions.
why there's so many questions, because you're exposing yourself to a much bigger world. And by the way, this is the minimum. This is what's expected of everyone. Like anyone who has any basic Jewish education in times past, that's what they had. But the idea of two people coming out with a completely dramatic, different understanding of a certain principle is very unlikely. But even if that, there's a lot of laws that we're talking about. There's an incredible amount of minutia of laws. And therefore, it's going to happen. There are going to be disagreements, slight disagreements. We can forget. We have to always constantly study in order to battle forgetfulness. It's going to happen. Well, even if that does happen, it's going to be quickly resolved. So yes, while I would agree to you that there were going to be machlokas arguments earlier, but the arguments that are easily resolved. Once you take away prophecy, you take away the Urim Tumim, right, and then we're on our own. Even if we maintain the commitment and motivation and degree of dedication to scholarship that we've had in the past, but those slight disagreements that are only naturally going to happen, well, that's going to be a problem, because that's what's going to create a machlokas.
What happened to that?
And that's why the Sanhedrin's role of adjudicating these disagreements is so crucial. Because if you do not come with one solution, and even if it's the wrong solution, but let there be only one solution, because then you have united people. Once you have this rabbi saying, well, I studied it this way, this rabbi says I studied it that way, no matter how fine and minute the disagreement is, well, you have two Judaisms, because there's different practices. And that's why it's better, even if the rabbis get it wrong, that's why the verse we read in the Parsha a few weeks ago, that you have to listen to what the Sanhedrin says, even if they tell you that what right is left, what left is right and right is left. I told you, this is your left hand, left arm. You would say, Wolby lost it. So you would say,
what?
you would say, Wolby lost it. So sad, you know. It's nothing. What's that line? There's no greater waste than the human mind. What's
Right.
the nothing to squander the human
Something like
mind? It's one of the Negro colleges. So that was their motto. The blacks were only allowed to go to certain colleges. What is it? Guys, you're Americans here. Don't look at me. It's Booker T. Washington. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Is valuable.
I think a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Thank you. Okay,
Yeah, that's right.
that's what you would
Yeah.
say, right? If I say this is your left arm.
Just Black Lives
So discredit.
But if you come to the Sanhedrin, says the Talmud, it says the Torah is the Torah, and they tell you right is left, you got to listen to them. Now, why is that? Why would you have to listen to them? Something as nonsensical.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Ben. Like
That
they
what?
said something so off, like if it was off like directly to something Torah said, you would be discredited.
The Sanhedrin would be.
Or the
If you
person
told
who
me
said
this
it.
was my left arm and it's like obviously my right, it would be a little discrediting
Of me.
of you.
Okay, but the Torah says if you go to the Sanhedrin, not to me, and they tell you something, they tell you right's left, left's right, you got to listen. That's what the Torah says. Now, that can mean multiple things. This, number one, it can mean that Sanhedrin made a mistake. And there are opinions that say that that's what the Torah is saying. Even if the Sanhedrin made a mistake, and to you it's so clear as day that they're wrong, you still got to follow them. Why? Because it's better to have one mistake in one area and not lose the supremacy of Sanhedrin, because if they're gone, well, then it's chaos. Because they're gone, and then suddenly we have no way to ensure that mistakes are whittled away, are whittled out, and therefore every guy who has any mistake, that's going to create, every slight schism and understanding is going to create a new religion. That's one way to understand it. Another way to understand it is that, yes, to you it might seem like something so obvious and patently simple as this is my right arm, but maybe you're wrong. What if you're wrong? Is it possible it's something that's so clear to you, but you're actually wrong, and the Sanhedrin, which is the most skilled rabbis of the Jewish people, they're right, and you're wrong?
But what if the being wrong is actually just a test to see?
Yeah, but we don't play around with this kind of stuff.
No, like higher power test.
As the Talmud says, it's not in the heavens. It's our responsibility. And we have to use the best of our abilities, and we have to do everything we can. And this idea of transmitting the Torah, maintaining the Torah is so important that it's vital. It's vital to the Jewish people, of course, but to humanity as well. Because the Torah is not just a recipe for Jews, but it's Jews in their role of being the harbingers of goodness in the world. So if we're out, if we're nuked in the figurative sense, if we are not a factor anymore in the world, well, the world is doomed. And that would be unfortunate. Thus, essentially maintaining the integrity of the Torah is the most important mission in the entire world. And that's why there's so much invested into that. Because once we lose that, the Jewish people are going to quickly devolve into multiple religions. And when that happens, the world's mission is in great peril. Makes sense, guys? When I tell you, or when the Sanhedrin tells you that your right is your left and left is right, it could mean that they made a mistake. And you know what? Even if they made a mistake, it's better to follow them. It also could mean that you're actually wrong. And to you it's so obvious, but you're actually wrong. And I'll give you some examples. You know what? This is going to be controversial. I'm going to skip the controversial examples.
Oh.
But I'll give you guys some examples, okay?
I thought tonight was controversial.
Yeah.
Oh, is that right? Oh, so we'll settle down. I got more to say. But let's give some examples in Jewish history where people made decisions based upon what they were sure is right, and so sure that they were right that it was patently obvious that anyone who disagreed with them was silly. So let's give one example here, like the Hellenists. Good example.
Sure that they're right.
The Hellenists, they had such conviction in their life philosophy, yet now in hindsight we see that they were incredibly wrong and harmful to the Jewish people. Right? What were the Hellenists? They were the ones who argued for the adoption and the integration of Greek culture into Jewish life. And this was a massive force amongst the Jewish people, not today, but 2,200 years ago, 2,100 years ago, and even 2,000 years ago. They were a huge force. There was the Hellenists, there was the Sadducees, other groups. These were groups that argued, and maybe very logically, that we have to take a position where our belief system and our system of law is not in conflict with what the Greeks say. And we know that that was a grievous error in hindsight. It's one of the historical mistakes that people have made. Following false messiahs, another example. But I'll give you a contemporary example. This is the controversial one, and you know what? And I will try to mitigate the controversy before I even tell you what I'm talking about. I'll get that in a second. By saying that what? Let me finish my sentence.
Go.
There.
Yeah, go.
I'm going to mitigate the fallout of my controversy by saying that this was actually argued by a conservative rabbi to me. So I'm just telling you what he said. And he said that in the 1950s there was a halacha, psak halacha, so to speak, in the conservative movement, allowing driving on Shabbat to synagogue only. Why? What was the rationale? Because a lot of conservative Judaism follows halacha. It's binding, and therefore, if you can't drive on Shabbat, people aren't going to come to shul. Right? So what they say, you allowed to drive on Shabbat, but only to shul. And the logic is very overwhelmingly clear. Like, if you allow Jews to drive to shul, only to shul, well, then you'll boost shul participation, and the aggregate will be better off. That was the argument. And according to the unnamed conservative rabbi that I spoke to, he said that his teacher, JTS, told him that this was the downfall of the conservative movement. Why? Because what happened afterwards? What happens, right? If the conservative Jews cannot drive on Shabbat, well, they have to live near the synagogue. So what do you have? Every synagogue has a cluster of a community around it. Well, what happens when now the Jews can drive to the synagogue? Well, they can live wherever they want. Well, what happens to the intermarriage rate? What happens to the assimilation rate? What happens when your kids has no Jewish friends? What happens down the line, 50 years down the line? Well, we see what happens down the line. And you know what? We had Lee Wunsch. Lee Wunsch, I don't know who Lee Wunsch is. Lee Wunsch is the president and CEO of the Houston Federation, Jewish Federation. And he spoke to a group of our Torch. There's a picture of it in the calendar here. We had a barbecue for our young professionals, that division of Torch. Oh, there's a picture of him speaking once. And sorry. And
the first thing comes to mind with barbecue, but your rabbi's sitting around eating pork.
you know what? There's a picture of. Here's a picture on
It's pork and crawfish.
It's shrimp.
a picture on the month of. The first month, September. This month. Here we go. Look at the month of September, first month. And he spoke to our young adults. He had 60 young adults at the event. You know what he told us? You know what he said? This is Lee Wunsch, and I have it on file. What did he say? He said to our young people that him and his wife, Ro, they are members of Beth Yisrael. They go there every single Friday night. And Beth Yisrael is the biggest conservative shul in America.
In America?
Yes. Beth Yisrael in Houston. The biggest conservative shul in America. And he says him and his wife in their 60s are the youngest people there. So we can say clearly that the arguments, while it may have seemed crystal clear and so obvious in the 50s, Today, it's clearly a grievous error. Because while the intent was pure, we can assume at least, that their intention was righteous, and that was to increase people coming to shul. Well, the decision was actually a mistake, and I would argue that this may be an example of, to them, maybe at the time, it was something that was so obvious. It was like, it's your right hand, of course, your right hand. And the Sanhedrin comes and they say, no, this is a mistake. This is not your right hand. This is your left hand. This is a bad move. And they say, dude, you're of course, we see Jews that aren't coming to shul. Of course, we should allow them to drive only to shul. Now the conservative Jews, they drive everywhere but shul. Right, so it's controversial, and I know it's controversial,
They
but
all moved to Cyprus.
Yeah.
They all moved out to Cyprus.
That's why Shalom Cyprus needs to buy a hotel.
so everyone could come and
That'll be the shul.
yeah, that's a good idea. And
We shouldn't
you know,
allow our
it's
members to drive on shops. We shouldn't allow our members to drive on shops.
You make sure that all the rooms are
And you need the special light switches too, just in
And
case.
they'll make the switches.
all the Shabbat lights.
and
Timers.
Yeah, timers. Timers. I
The,
extended it so it wouldn't shut off on us.
No electric doors.
in Israel, all the hotels have keys, have manual keys for Shabbat. People don't want to let you stick that in. You flick in the lights, Either way, this is an example.
What
I can
about a
think.
lock?
What about a lock?
You're changing the reality of,
You're making it locked to.
Yeah, so we have to learn the laws of building, but it's clear from the laws of building that's not a problem.
what about
Building.
the fan changing the reality from one day to the next?
Well, yeah, the fan is, so you can't turn the fan on Shabbat, but if it's on already, you could still enjoy it.
Yeah, just leave it on and just go to
No,
bed.
forgetting the electricity part. You mentioned it changed the reality. If you change,
No.
forget the electricity piece. Like the fifth or sixth thing you said.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
okay.
Go
You
ahead.
said-
Molded.
Alright,
Yeah,
doors
you
right
can't
there.
change the reality of.
So you're saying, why is the lock not molded? It's a good
Yeah.
question, but it's not. But it's a good question. I have to learn the details.
Can't
It's a very complicated book. I know people.
You can't carry the key inside.
I know people that
Unless
Brad.
it's an indoor.
I know people that spend
Same
dedicate
domain.
literally large chunks of their life to studying the Talmud of Shabbos. It's very, very big, and very intense.
Yeah, I don't really understand the difference between electrical and mechanical.
Well, let's do it.
You know,
Get the books, and there's a lot of reading that we need to do to catch up. Either way, a controversial idea aside, I do think that there's a possibility for us to really think and have conviction and actually be wrong. Or perhaps what it means is the Sanhedrin is telling you, hey, where's your right hand? Face me. If you face me, your right hand's on that side, right? But if you face that way, your right hand's on that side. Well, maybe what it means is they're telling you right, left is right. What they're telling you is your direction is wrong. Ooh. And obviously that is something which is even more painful to hear, because that is not an indictment on a certain behavior or act, but it's an indictment, or it's calling into question your entire direction in life, so to speak. And no one wants to hear that about their life, that their life direction is wrong. But says the Torah, even if someone tells you that, well, maybe that's what it means. Either way, clearly at this point in time, Sanhedrin is going to become a very vital, pivotal, essential, crucial governing body of the Jewish people, because their chief job is to enable and ensure smooth transmission of the oral Torah. And when that became untenable, because the Sanhedrin was disbanded, it had to be written down. Because if it wasn't written down, it would be lost forever.
Has anybody ever tried or thought about putting it back together?
They actually
Well,
tried.
that's what the Talmud is.
No, the San.
Oh, the Sanhedrin. Oh,
They've been
Sanhedrin.
trying.
Yeah, so there's a movement to put it back together. Maimonides outlines how to do it.
71?
Yeah. Well, 71. You know,
Has to be
there's some
descendants.
problems. You have to,
descendants of
You
Sanhedrin.
have to get consensus. And
and the requirements to be on the Sanhedrin are very, very exhaustive. For example, a Sanhedrin cannot hear testimony from an interpreter. So every language that people could potentially speak, the Sanhedrin has to be fluent in that language. Every individual of Sanhedrin has to be fluent in that language.
Wow.
So Talmud says that some of the members of the Sanhedrin spoke 70 languages.
Oh my. That's
So
mind-boggling.
that's mind-boggling, but that's not that's the easiest thing that they need to do. Like that's that part's easy.
Is that on top of the however many hours of study?
Oh yeah, it's this
So
is.
you gotta study it.
Oh yeah, and even when you're admitted to Sanhedrin, and this is what I mentioned earlier in passing, so we said there's 71, but there's actually in the Sanhedrin, in the venue where Sanhedrin was located, you had 3 groups of 23, so 69 more scholars that were apprentices, like clerks. They were clerking for the Sanhedrin, and they were there because they were on the. They were on the waiting list. They were on standby.
They were your alternate jurors.
They were the just in case someone.
No, well, yeah, exactly. So, someone who is, someone in the Sanhedrin, someone dies in the Sanhedrin, their spot is vacated, obviously, and then the most senior of the 69 apprentices, he gets the next seat on the Sanhedrin.
They don't 100 games it out.
100 games. No. And then everyone moves up a slot. So 68 becomes 69, and 52 becomes 53, and then they have to nominate someone from the community, the greatest scholar in the community, who's not part of the Sanhedrin or the lower courts of the Sanhedrin, gets nominated to join.
So you could be 80 years old before you even get a spot, and then
Yeah, because think about it. There's 16. Once you're nominated, you need 69 more people to die before you actually get your seat in Sanhedrin. And that's essentially the entire
That sounds
Sanhedrin.
like a great story, great book.
Yeah.
The guy really wanted it.
Killing his way
Agatha
up,
Christie.
yeah.
Oh, God.
Everybody's getting killed.
That's sacrilegious. My
Sounds
goodness.
like a Dan Brown book.
That's 69 days right there.
Like this-
69 days.
69 days and a lot of arsenic.
Oh, my
How did
goodness.
you feed everyone apple seeds? No one would suspect it.
Oh, that's
Kill 'em off.
Wow.
69 days to the Sanhedrin.
Okay, guys. We didn't even get to talk about what. This was a lot more fun than what I anticipated. So
Good.
either way, I feel we got like a little bit of an insight
We covered
into
a lot.
into oral Torah, written Torah.
and they did eat.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Oh,
So they were nominated, and they went to.
they saw the throne, whatever it was. Got that vision of.
Oh, okay. Well, no, these are not the 70 elders yet.
That's a different 70.
Right. So go to so this is not the 70. These are the elders. We don't know the unnamed elders. Why they're not named is also a question, but they're not named.
2 loaves
Jesus.
with his 2 loaves of bread and 5 fish.
So we got a little bit of an insight into the oral Torah, the written Torah, how they interrelate, what the process of transmission is.
Fishing in
A lot of
circles
Shabbat
before.
stuff covered.
Yeah.
Huh?
A lot of Shabbat stuff covered.
Shabbat stuff, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Well,
That can go on forever.
yeah. This was a good discussion. I really enjoyed it, guys. Thanks a
I
lot.
enjoyed it a lot.
And I don't believe I'll be seeing you guys next week because Reverend Olson's next week. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then on holiday.
And then there's the holidays. Then there's Rosh Hashanah. So, Siva V'Chasima Tova, which is the traditional blessing that we say when we say goodbye to people on the holiday in the month preceding Rosh Hashanah, which means Siva means writing, Chasima means stamping. So if I wish you to have a good writing and good stamping, which means that we read in Rosh Hashanah that Rosh Hashanah is the day where someone's verdict is written, but it doesn't get finalized to Yom Kippur. So may you all have a wonderful, sweet, and happy New Year, and have another fantastic year of Torah growth and study with me. It was awesome this past year.
Yeah.
Do another round, and it was a pleasure. It really was. And I hope if I mistreated any one of you guys that you'll forgive me completely.
Yeah.
I'm
We'll
letting you brag.
forgive you, but you've never mistreated. So.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate
I'm
that.
just glad you came
Just
back.
glad you came back.
And keep on going.
And yes, and look forward to seeing you guys in 5776, right? See you next year. Okay. All the best,
I
guys.
still have a question.
Question,
though,
shoot.
It's rattling in my mind.
Go ahead.
And it's a previous question I asked, but I don't
Remind
know.
me, what was the question?
Okay. It was the pursuer question.
Pursuer.
Yeah.
I
With
think you
pursuer.
asked this one in your mind and didn't actually
You asked
Not
it today?
tonight.
No, I
No.
didn't ask it tonight. I asked
Yeah.
it like a month and a half ago.
She's still waiting for her answer.
Okay, sorry. You didn't have to
Just-
remind me of the
That's why it's
question.
coming back.
It's like it's still there.
For the answer.
Cliffhanger.
It's a cliffhanger. And okay, so in the Torah, you're supposed to protect yourself if
You can
someone's
plead
trying to
yeah,
kill you.
That's right.
However, you're not supposed to give away if you're hiding someone and they could be potentially killed. So the question was, if someone came up to you and held a gun to your head, would you have to tell, or would you have to keep your mouth shut?
Paint the scenario again. Someone comes with a gun to the head, that much I got. They say, if you don't do X, I'll shoot you. What's X?
If you don't tell me where you're hiding the guy you're hiding, I'm going to shoot you.
Oh, that's an informer.
The informer.
Yes, so, the informer, okay. Can I, and that's going to lead to that person's death?
Yes.
Then that would not be allowed.
So you
The
would get
question,
shot.
I think, is a good question if we're not sure if it's going to lead to his death.
So you
What
would
if
get
they just-
shot before you tell where you're hiding the person.
Oh, yeah, because then you're allowing the guy to get killed.
But you're
so-
allowing yourself to get killed.
Well, yes, but the question is, do you have a right? Do you? It's a good question. I think it's a good question. I remember the question now because I said it was a good question then, right?
But there wasn't an answer at the time.
Yeah. But I think it's worthy of investigation. I'll tell you why. And this may be a little bit inside baseball here. Like this: someone comes, puts a gun to your head, and says, "Shoot the other guy, or I shoot you."
No, don't shoot. The
I know.
Tell me- Okay.
We'll work. We'll get to your example, right?
Oh,
I come to somewhere. Someone comes to someone and says, "Hey, shoot the other guy, or else I shoot you." Then the Talmud says clearly you cannot kill someone to save yourself. Why? So the words that it uses is, "Who says your blood is redder than his blood?" Maybe his blood is redder than yours. We spoke about that Friday, the Thursday night when you came to your Israel.
So about you?
Now the question is like this: that we are not allowed to allow someone to die in order to save our own skin. Does that mean that we're not allowed to kill them to save ourselves, or we're not allowed to allow them to get killed in order to save ourselves? That's really what your question is. Because maybe technically, when I let's zoom out a little bit here. Now, if it's a little hard to follow, it's because it's a little hard to follow. When someone says, "Hey, I'll shoot you unless you eat the cheeseburger," which is not kosher, prohibited by Torah law. What do you got to do? You got to eat the cheeseburger. Why? How are you allowed to eat the cheeseburger? Torah says no eating cheeseburgers.
because life is.
But so what? How are you able to do something that's prohibited by Torah law? Technically, mechanically, how's it working? There's a prohibition. Where's the prohibition waived?
You're saving a life.
Okay,
Even if it's your own.
you're saving a life. So the saving life waives the prohibition. Is that right? So now the case of murder. The guy comes in with the same gun to the head. This time he's not saying eat a cheeseburger, he's saying to kill someone. So you can't do it. Why not?
It's 3 prohibitions.
But I understand that you cannot do it. But why not? Technically, back to the
Murder.
technical.
You
Because
can't kill.
murder cannot be waived. Is that what it's saying? Is it that the prohibition of murder is so severe that it cannot be waived? Or the result of someone dying can't be waived? You hear that little subtle difference? It sounds like someone dying, right? It doesn't say, "Hey, who allows you to murder?" It says just like it says you cannot eat cheeseburgers, it says you cannot murder. Right? So how is that waived? So maybe it's not waived. The prohibition of murder is not waived. Well, if the prohibition of murder is not waived, therefore you can't kill him to save yourself. But there's no prohibition of murder in the sense of if the other guy's going to kill him.
Murder in terms of self-defense is allowed.
True, we're not dealing with cases of self-defense here. Right?
It is self-defense.
It's only self-defense if the victim of that you're going to kill is the cause of your
Bodily harm. Yeah.
So, for
That's fine
example,
here.
can I kill someone because I need their kidney? Self-defense, right? They have a kidney. I need one. Right? Is that allowed?
You just have to leave them in the bathtub full of ice, right? With an out.
That's right.
Yeah.
From what
And
is-
Am I?
Bucky's.
From Bucky.
I use Bucky's.
It's cheaper,
So come full circle.
right? If you had lots of money, you would buy a kidney yourself, right? Clearly, this is
Okay,
How
so
to
I
get
see
kidneys.
your point.
on the cheap, right? Am I allowed to kill someone because they're posing a threat to me, right? Because they have my kidney? Well, no. The reason why I'm about to die is not because of them. It's because of my failing kidney. They're the remedy. They're not the cause. You can't kill someone because they have the remedy to your problem.
But you're allowed to say, oh, he's hiding behind the couch.
Does that answer your question?
So he shoots him instead of me.
No, so that you would not be able to do either.
You still can't do that.
No. But that's not direct murder.
The
So
kid
to
was-
answer your question,
No, it's
that's
like
why it's a little bit of a technical
I'm gonna
question.
shoot you, you don't tell me where they are.
Technically,
And you know
if
that
we
you
say
killed
that the
him.
prohibition
You killed
of
him again.
not killing someone to save yourself is just because you cannot waive the prohibition against murder to save yourself. Well, is this murder? To tell someone where someone's staying, is that murder? Well, I'm not killing someone. It's not murder. The other guy's killing. I'm bringing it about. I'm assisting someone in murdering, but I'm not actually murdering someone. So maybe then it wouldn't be allowed. But I think everyone agreed that what's different about murder is the fact that the guy's dead. That's why it's more severe. And therefore, what it's saying is, I cannot do something to save myself if that doing something is going to bring about someone's demise. Well, then it wouldn't matter if that demise is going to happen as a result of my murder or as a result of someone else's murder.
Okay.
So I would say it's not allowed.
Okay.
I think that's what we're agreed upon. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But if
Thank
if you don't shoot the
But it's a little
other
technical.
person-
That's why it's a complicated. It's a good question because it really depends. How do we understand the prohibition of murdering someone in a
Versus
case
saving
where,
yourself. Yeah.
right? In case of saving yourself. That's right.
But if you don't shoot the other person, your life is going to be gone.
So,
what's
but
the
your life might be
difference?
gone anyhow. You know, that's true. Your life might be gone, and that's unfortunate.
Either way,
But it doesn't- it
life
doesn't-
is gone.
That's true. So then, what do you do?
So you both go for the guy with the gun.
Well, if you can, then that would be great.
Yeah, you wink, wink.
If you can, that would be great. But the problem is that you're not allowed to commit murder. So thus, if you died without committing murder. If the other, if you kill the guy, yeah, then he dies. So the net amount of death is the same. But the question is, what's right for you to do? And what's right for you to do is to not commit murder.
But if you commit murder because of self-defense.
Self-defense is, remember, what's self-defense? Self-defense doesn't mean that killing the guy is my remedy. It means that
Trying to
killing the
get the
guy
gun
is getting rid of
away.
the problem.
Trying to get
Thus,
the
if
gun away
a guy
has to
comes
be
and puts a gun to your head and says, kill a third party, you would not be allowed to kill the third party, but you're allowed to kill the guy with the gun to your head. Because he is the cause of your life being in peril, not the remedy. Made sense, guys?
Yep.
Okay. This was a lot of fun.
Good.
Very broad variety of...
I have a question.
Oh, let's do it.
You mentioned earlier that the two words tied together for marriage was when
yes. Just
Moses was bearing.
Not Moses, Abraham.
I'm sorry, Abraham was bearing Sarah.
Yes, sir.
But didn't they offer that for free? And then he's like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to pay. So why would that be tied to marriage? I don't even understand
Let me
that.
ask you a question. Did your wife only marry you because of the ring that you got her that was worth $40?
$40. I don't know. You have to ask her that question.
What do you think?
I hope not.
You hope not, right?
Right.
Maybe it's precisely connection as a result. That yes, your wife would have married you for free. It wasn't because of the simple gold ring that you gave her. Remember, we don't get married with diamond rings. The diamond, right? The ring is a simple wedding band. Well, maybe it's actually precisely comparable because there also the guy initially said take it for free, and then he insisted on having some monetary transaction. So the Torah is saying, even though your wife may say, you don't need the ring, I'll marry you regardless. Still, you have to do the monetary transaction. How lovely is that?
See, mine was all for the money.
Huh?
Mine was all for the money. In the vows, we have it on tape. She says, "For richer, for richer."
For richer.
And who's Richard?
It is Richard. That's the problem.
Okay,
It's a true
everyone.
story.
And what happened to the breastplate?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of things are. We don't know where they are.
Darth Vader
Darth Vader.
We don't know where the
Indiana
ark
Jones and
is.
So
Craig?
what causes the evolution, if it's working, what causes the evolution of them to turn away from it?
We
To do
mean
something new?
I think it was lost.
what the?
What happened to
The
it?
breastplate.
Yeah.
Well, that the breastplate, but there's other things as well. Like there's the shulchan, what's called the table in the temple, the ark of the covenant in the temple. They're gone. We don't know where they are. It's likely there's a lot of right. You Google this. There's a lot of theories, whatever. It seems likely that this was archived by some coins, archived it, put it someplace that we have no idea where it is. I know some guy once theorized that there were in these caves that are impossible to reach. Somehow they got it in there. Place, either way, we don't know where they are. That's the correct answer.
So they did it because it was in danger? Or?
Yeah, when they saw that the kind of light, or that the writing was on the wall, they saw it was over for them, and they didn't want the sacred vessels of the temple being in the hands of the non-Jews, even though they were, like Achashverosh,
Yeah,
Persian
right.
king, he had a bunch of them. So we don't know where they are exactly and where they are now. It's a very intriguing topic of mystique.
They're hidden in a clay pot.
Well, I don't know where they are. That's the correct answer. Okay, everyone. Thanks a lot, guys.
Cool.